Welcome to the synthesis of yoga, the book that changed my life. We are now at the end of this chapter called The Ascent of Sacrifice 1. It is the fifth chapter of the part 1 of the synthesis of yoga, and we are on paragraph 21. For those who are new, please check the description. You will find the link there to this chapter. In our previous episode, we have seen, Aurobindo has shown us that the religious urge as well as the ethical urge, both are insufficient for integral yoga. While philanthropy, service to humanity, humanitarian activities, all that are well and good, it is insufficient because it cannot fundamentally transform human nature. It cannot dissolve ego. This is necessary for spiritual development and transformation we are looking at. Both this religious urge and humanitarian or the ethical urge cannot do that. It is for that reason integral yoga sees the inadequacy of such methods, and what is required is the emergence and growth of the psychic being and coming in front, taking the charge. Second, transforming our human love into divine love. And third, ascending an ascension of our consciousness into higher ranges of consciousness and arriving at supramental consciousness that alone can successfully transform the human nature. Without it, the purpose of integral yoga cannot be accomplished. Therefore, this religious approach, ethical approach, the whole humanitarian work, philanthropic work, insufficient. It will not be sufficient enough for our objective. Now, let's proceed further. Paragraph 21. It is the very nature of the soul or the psychic being to turn towards the divine truth as the sunflower to the sun. Now, this is the essential nature of the psychic being. Like a flower plant would seek sunlight. A sunflower would always track the sun and face the sun. That's the nature of the psychic being. It is always seeking the divine, recognizing the divine presence, and rejoicing in that divine presence. That is the very reason for its seeking. It is for recognizing and surrendering to that divine light and presence and force. So it is the very nature of the soul or the psychic being to turn towards the divine truth as the sunflower to the sun. It accepts and clings to all that is divine or progressing towards divinity, and draws back from all that is a perversion or a denial of it, from all that is false and undivine. This is the essential nature. When we say undivine, at a fundamental level, at an essential level, everything is nothing but the divine. But in the manifestation, where there is a play of duality, right and wrong, good and bad, God and evil, all that is part of the manifestation that is imperfect, whereas the essential reality is nothing but divine In manifest reality, there is a practical separation things into that which is undivine and divine, which is a relative term. So there are always things that are closer in terms of its evolution, in terms of its expression, closer towards that divine truth of our being, divine essence of our being, and the divine reality behind all this. Everything in nature, everything in the manifestation is in a scale of, we can say, hierarchy, where things that are refined and closer to the divine reality, and there are things that are moving away from it and degenerating and disintegrating and deviating and even rebelling. So that which is distorted, perverted, and revolting and even opposing that higher divine reality, the progression towards it, these forces of opposition, distortion, degeneration, disintegration, that is what we consider as undivine. It is a practical distinction, even when the essential reality is nothing but the divine truth. So, the psychic being has this innate ability to discern that which is moving towards that divine perfection, divine beauty, divine freedom, divine presence. That is the unique ability of the psychic being, and that is there seated within us. No other part of our being has that unerring discernment. Our mind is seeking knowledge through its analysis, exploration of the external world, and it is not capable of recognizing the divine presence. So is our emotional being. The emotional being, through its aesthetic experience, gets a touch of it, but it still cannot experience the divine presence the way the psychic being would relish it, recognize it, surrender to it. Those our emotional being can turn towards it, seek it, feel its presence. Nothing like the psychic being's simple, quiet discernment. Similarly, our vital senses, body, all of them, by their essence, by their very nature, are not turned towards divine. They all look for their own satisfaction in their own limited ways. Senses seeking pleasure, vital being seeking action, body seeking its food, rest, sleep, all that. Psychic being, on the other hand, is always turned towards the divine, pointing towards the greater perfection. So it is the very nature of the soul or the psychic being to turn towards the divine truth as the sunflower to the sun. It accepts and clings to all that is divine or progressing towards divinity, and draws back from all that is perversion or a denial of it, from all that is false and undivine. So, this discerning faculty within us is the psychic being in this yoga, which can show us which movement is taking us closer towards the divine, which movement is taking us away from it, and what is a distortion, and what is a perversion, and what is undivine falsehood. That discernment the psychic being spontaneously and naturally brings. This no other part of our being is capable of doing. Every other part, mental, vital, physical, all of them are prone to error and deception. Therefore, it is absolutely essential for us to turn inward and recognize the presence and guidance of the psychic being. That is absolutely central to integral yoga. Yet, the soul at first, but a spark and then a little flame of Godhead burning in the midst of a great darkness. So that is its very nature in the early stages of soul's evolution. It is a tiny little spark slowly growing into a flame. In the vast surrounding darkness, from there it is slowly emerging, and it is emerging within us. It's a flame of Godhead emerging within us. Its very nature is purity, love, and delight. For the most part, it is veiled in its inner sanctum. Inner sanctum. When we look at Indian temples, there is the sanctum sanctorum. You go after layer by layer, wall after wall, all the way till you reach the inner sanctum where there is the deity sitting. Our human body is like a temple, but we do not know the deity seated within. And there is an inner sanctum to be discovered. There is an inner cave that Sri Aurobindo has already referred to, Upanishadic Rishis referred to, Hridaya Kuhara Madhye. There is a cave in the heart, and the depth of that heart, there is a little flame, the divine presence seated, the divinity within us, a sacred presence, absolutely pure, immaculate. For the most part, it is veiled in its inner sanctum. And to reveal itself, it has to call on the mind, the life force, and the physical consciousness and persuade them as best they can to express it. So this inner divinity has to call upon the mind, the life energy, the body to express itself outwardly. If our mind is not listening to the soul within, then the soul cannot find its expression in life. Similarly, if our heart is not seeking the sacred divinity within, then our emotional being cannot express. It will be only turned outward and looking for human emotions and human relationships and all that. So, same thing true for the entire instrumental nature. And the psychic being has to use them. And this is where the challenge is. Often these instruments are not listening. They are caught up in the external world and external phenomena and the drama of the world. To reveal itself, it has to call on the mind, the life force, and the physical consciousness and persuade them as best they can to express it. Ordinarily, it succeeds at most in suffusing their outwardness with its inner light and modifying with its purifying fineness their dark obscurities or their coarser mixture. These outer layers, our mental, vital, physical layers, are relatively crude, coarse. It is part of emerging evolution in which we are waking up, but deep within us there is this emerging psychic being which is so noble, so pure, so refined. It will be able to bring its fineness into these instrumental layers and refine them, remove their coarseness, purify them, transform them when they are ready to listen to the psychic being and open to that influence. So when we quietly look inward, we can sense something in us guiding. Whenever we violate our deepest truth, there is an inner discomfort. Whenever we see something beautiful, there is a rejoicing of something deep within, an awakening of the soul within. Pure beauty is really the food for the soul. Similarly, truth, goodness, all that, the inmost being recognize here is the truth, here is goodness, here is beauty. That is its way of nudging us, helping the mind to refine, the vital to refine, the physical to refine. It will help even to make the daily choices, what to eat, what not to eat, what to buy, what not to buy, what to say, what not to say. All that discernment will be made easy for us the more we come in touch with the psychic being. The soul is at first but a spark, and then a little flame of Godhead, burning in the midst of a great darkness. For the most part, it is veiled in its inner sanctum, and to reveal itself, it has to call on the mind, the life force, the physical consciousness, to persuade them as best they can to express it. Ordinarily, it succeeds at most in suffusing their outwardness with its inner light and modifying with its purifying fineness their dark obscurities or their coarse mixture. So that is how the psychic being quietly begins to emerge and influence and refine our outer nature. And it is absolutely essential for us to recognize the presence and guidance of the psychic being so that we can follow that guidance in our action in the world. And here we are in the context of the works of love. And psychic being is really the key to open the doors of that works of love in the world. Even when there is a formed psychic being, it's very important. This is the evolutionary part in us, this evolving soul. In some individuals, it is still unformed. It is still a very tiny little spark. It is still in its early stages of evolution. In some individuals, it has already, over many, many births, it has emerged and taken a clear, individualized form. So when there is a formed psychic being able to express itself with some directness in life, it is still in all but a few, a smaller portion of the being, no bigger in the mass of the body than the thumb of a man, was the image used by the ancient seers. As small as a little thumb. That is how Upanishads refers to the psychic being, the formed psychic being that is emerging. And only when it emerges with a clear form and individuation, that is when it is able to express itself directly in life, influence the mind, influence the life, influence the body, all that. And this happens only to a small percentage of people, not vast majority are still emerging. That spark is growing. What is happening is helping of that spark to nurture the spark so that the soul grows. This is where the whole spiritual evolution of consciousness come into picture. The whole purpose of education come into picture to help that tiny little spark to emerge and form. That being emerges, the soul emerges with a unique individuality. Otherwise, masses would tend to indulge in the outer life and its coarse experiences. It is still in all but a smaller portion of the being, no bigger in the mass of the body than the thumb of a man, was the image used by the ancient seers. And it is not always able to prevail against the obscurity or ignorant smallness of the physical consciousness. So there is certain obscurity and ignorant smallness of the physical consciousness. Our body consciousness has a tendency to feel itself to be something very small because our body itself is a tiny little dot in this vast material nature. It feels itself to be very, very small, and its nature is tamasic, so obscure by itself. This is a contribution of this physical consciousness feeling something very, very small, obscure. So it is not always able to prevail against The soul, the emerging soul as the psychic being, is not able to prevail against the obscurity of ignorant smallness of the physical consciousness and mistaken sureness of the mind. So, on one hand, we have our body consciousness making us feel that, look at me, I'm this small little thing. What can I do? The world is so big. Problems that I'm encountering is so complex and I cannot do. Only those who are powerful and strong can do. I have no power. I'm so small. I cannot do. That is typically the physical consciousness contributing its sense of smallness because of the identification with the body. Our true nature is infinite, vast. But since we identify with this tiny little body, we experience ourselves to be this small little thing. And on the other hand, we have a mind that is thinking it knows and it has its certitude, sureness. And it goes ahead with its tiny little knowledge, little candlelight with which it is living. But since it has no idea of the greater sun, the greater light of spiritual truth, spiritual knowledge, it has no connection with it, no understanding. So it lives with its tiny little flicker of the candlelight. And it is very sure about its little knowledge. And no doubt also. That is the problem with the mind. Mistaken sureness of the mind or the arrogance and vehemence of the vital nature. And our vital nature is arrogant by itself. And vehement, it brings its intensity. So when the vital and the mind comes together, there is a certitude, arrogance of the mind supported by, rather, arrogance of the vital, amplifying the certitude of the mind, and you become a fanatic. That is what often happens. A tiny little mind, having its little knowledge, believing that this is the absolute truth, and that is reinforced and fortified by the arrogance of the vital. And you have the problem. Therefore, this emerging psychic being is not necessarily always able to prevail against the obscurity and smallness of the physical consciousness, or the sureness of the mental consciousness, or the arrogance and vehemence of the vital consciousness. We get carried away by them, our surface nature, and we fail to recognize the quiet inner guidance, quiet nudging coming from the psychic being. Even when there is a formed psychic being able to express itself with some directness in life, it is still, in all but a few, a small portion of the being, no bigger in the mass of the body than the thumb of a man, was the image used by the ancient seers. And it is not always able to prevail against the obscurity or ignorant smallness of the physical consciousness, the mistaken sureness of the mind, or the arrogance and vehemence of the vital nature. This soul is obliged to accept the human, mental, emotive, sensational life as it is. Its relations, its activities, its cherished forms and figures. So when these outer layers of the mind, vital and physical, they are on their own trip. Therefore, the psychic being is obliged to accept them as they are. That is the starting point. Seeing this is how it is. So in yoga, you will find your psychic being is emerging. And you're recognizing that your mind is always running after its objects of search and finding knowledge, and it's lost in its own thought and pursuits. And the vital being, emotional being, is caught up in its own outer relationships and issues, and senses are after things. And psychic being is able to recognize all this and know that look, I'm not able to transform them. It is obliged to accept things as it is in the very beginning. First is recognizing that your mind is running after things. Your emotional being is going after its own stories. Layer by layer, you will find the same thing happening. Its relations, its activities, its cherished forms and figures. Every part will cling to its own activities. It has to labor to disengage and increase the divine element. So first it has to labor. There is an inner labor, the silent labor of the psychic being to disengage and increase the divine element. In all this relative truth mixed with an continual falsifying error. So we are dealing with a mixed truth. There is a distortion of truth in the mind, in the vital, in the physical. So psychic being is able to recognize the distortions and slowly begins to correct. And there is a labor of this by refining the sensory enjoyment, by refining the bodily activities, mental activities, vital activities, all that. So there is an increasing of the divine element. There is a labor by the psychic being to gently nudge and support these things. First standing back because they are not obeying, and then slowly bringing the influence and gently nudging them. It has to labor to disengage and increase the divine element. In all this relative truth mixed with a continual falsifying error. This love turned to the uses of the animal body or the satisfaction of the vital ego. This life of an average manhood, shot with rare and pale glimpses of Godhead and the darker luridities of the demon and the brute. So this is the nature of our outer being. Even when there is a profound divine love within, a tiny little reflection of it touches upon the heart. Then there it disintegrates, degenerates, and becomes very, very coarse because it gets involved in human relationships, attachments, and all the distortions and insecurities that happens. And then it becomes anger, violence, hatred. So love gets totally distorted in the process. The same thing happens to every other instrument. Knowledge coming from the soul finds its expression in the mind, but soon it gets distorted, disintegrated, damaged. And there is a darker luridities of the demon and the brute within us, a shocking, violent nature within us, a part of us that is quite animal in its nature. But when it utilizes the intelligence of the mind, it gets even worse. So there is the darkness in human nature that gets amplified by the distortion of the intelligence, serving the animal instincts for sex, possession, territoriality, all that will be something that our psychic being has to deal with, progressively refine and transform. But first is to recognize, or first is to step back, stand back, detach, and see that I am not this mind going after its objects of sensory understanding. I'm not this emotions that is getting entangled with the relationships outside. I'm not the senses seeking after pleasure, and stepping back and back and back, and you begins to feel the gentle little nudge within, guiding. And then you begin to see how I can influence these instrumental layers, refine them, uplift them from their dark course, behavior, and entanglement in the outer nature. So this soul is obliged to accept the human, mental, emotive, sensational life as it is. its relations, its activities, its cherished forms and figures. It has to labor to disengage and increase the divine element. In all this relative truth mixed with a continual falsifying error. This love turned to the uses of the animal body or the false satisfaction of the vital ego. This life of an average manhood, shot with rare and pale glimpses of our Godhead, and the darker luridities of the demon and the brute. So that's a slow and steady work. This is sadhana, where we learn, first we recognize there is something divine within us, and we learn to disentangle from this outer confusions and slowly come in touch with that inner guide. Like things like fine poetry, music, literature, all that helps to come in touch with that. Study of scriptures, coming in touch with great masters, art, painting. These things help us to come in touch with something deeper, finer within us. That's why culture, being cultured means something that is refined. Art and culture is always something that is very close to the soul. So the soul element in a civilization can be found in their art and culture. More refined a culture is, more expressive the soul is. That is a sign. A fine culture means there is an emergence of the soul and its presence. Soul is able to reveal itself through beautiful forms of art. Unerring in the essence of its will, it is obliged often under the pressure of its instruments to submit to mistakes of action, wrong placement of feeling, wrong choice of person, errors in the exact form of its will, in the circumstances of its expression of the infallible inner ideal. So on one hand, the psychic being knows the truth, and it has its infallible ideal. It has its continuous orientation towards the divine reality. But its will, that has to deal with the external instrumentation, that gets mistaken in the outer action. It gets misplaced in the activities of the outer expression. It is not able to freely express. Things get limited, distorted, misplaced, darkened. Often it happens that when you are trying to express yourself, your deepest feeling, you see that your words are inadequate. Your emotions are inadequate and you stumble because your outer nature is not yet capable of giving fine form to what you deeply know. Your language you find insufficient, your vocabulary insufficient. Even your works of art, you find it is not yet expressing the beauty and harmony and truth I want to bring out. So this happens even when you have come in touch with the soul within. When you want to express, there is a limitation, there is a distortion, there is a lowering of these expressions. The unerring in the essence of its will, it is obliged often under the pressure of its instruments to submit to mistakes of action. Submitting to mistakes of action. In the field of action, a lot of mistakes happen, even when there is a good intention deep within. Wrong placement of feeling. Even feelings get placed in the wrong movement. Wrong choice of person, errors in the exact form of its will, in the circumstances of its expression of the infallible inner ideal. So for quite some time in our sadhana, we experience this. especially when you see that there is so much beauty inside you, but you're not able to express it in life. And whatever way you try to do, it gets distorted, it gets damaged, it gets pale reflection of a greater inner light, not able to find its true free expression. This is part of the journey. Yet is there a divination within it, which makes it a surer guide than the reason or than even the highest desire. So there is this divination, a guidance, pointer showing us this is the truth, even if it is not able to implement that direction. Execution is one thing. First is knowing what is the direction to take. Even when you fail at an execution level, first you must know. And the psychic being gives that correct guidance, proper divination, which makes it a surer guide than the reason or even the highest desire. Our emotions are more and more refined desires, and even none of them come anywhere near the guidance of the psychic being. And through apparent errors and stumblings, its voice can still lead better than the precise intellect and the considering mental judgment. So our mind can analyze, consider all kinds of permutations and combinations, good and bad, and analyze the situation with all its complexity and arrive at a conclusion. Even with that, we cannot really rely, whereas the psychic being has a better way of discerning compared to even a well-developed mind. Therefore, opening to that influence, in spite of its errors and stumblings, the psychic being in its execution, translation into mental, vital, physical terms, there is still a loss of transmission. In spite of that, it is still a better guide than our limited mental light and knowledge. So yet is there a divination within it, which makes it a surer guide than the reason, or than even the highest desire. And through apparent errors and stumblings, its voice can still lead better than the precise intellect and the considering mental judgment. And to make that transition is very important, learning to recognize and to rely that guidance more and more than our erring intellect, however precise it is. This voice of the soul is not what we call conscience, for that is only a mental and often conventional erring substitute. This is some very, very important detail we need to get clarity on. Confusing the conscience for the soul within. Though initially it starts with that, but we need to go beyond conscience to truly find the psychic being. Conscience is a result of our mind and mental consciousness, and its very nature is an outward orientation. And what it does is based on its social custom in which it was brought up, sense of morality it has got, and sense of ethic it has developed. These in combination will create sense of conscience in the mental being. This we need to recognize very clearly, and so that we don't confuse the conscience for the psychic being and its guidance. However, in the early stage, this is where we get some reference to enter inward. But one should not stop there, go deeper. This voice of the soul is not what we call conscience, for that is only a mental and often conventional erring substitute. It's a conventional and erring substitute. It is a deeper and more seldom heard call. Seldom heard. Very rarely we hear that deepest call. Yet to follow it when heard is wisest. Even it is better to wander at the call of one's soul than to go apparently straight with the reason and the outward moral mentor. Our outer being has its moral mentor, morality, social constructs, ethical principles, philosophical references, all that are part of the outer being, and that gives a compass for dealing with the outer life. And going with that, especially when you have an inner call of the soul, when you have heard that little inner cry from within, it is better to listen to that and wander than go straight with your limited outer being's mentorship. It's a deeper and more seldom heard call, yet to follow when heard is wisest. When you get that call, you must follow that, and it is worth wandering in that call than to go straight with the conventional stuff. Even it is better to wander at the call of one's soul than to go apparently straight. It is only apparently straight with the reason and the outward moral mentor. But it is only when the life turns towards the divine that the soul can truly come forward and impose its power on the outer members. When life turns towards the divine. So initially, even in our search for yoga, yogic knowledge, spiritual evolution, spiritual growth, it is still very much centered around I, me, and myself. Not searching for the divine, but looking for some yogic siddhis, some good feelings inside, some personal development. That is where we start. Well and good, it's a good start, but gradually we recognize that I am being guided by something greater than I can imagine, and it is ever present, it is always supporting, guiding. Even what appeared to me like a disaster, a painful incident, a great loss, behind it there was a support, a hand that was nudging and leading towards a greater possibility. And you will come to a point where you recognize it more and more, and you want to know, what is your will? How do I serve you? How do I surrender to you completely? How do I read your language? How do I recognize your presence more and more? This is a typical influence emerging from the psychic being. And that Godward turn, whole life become a search for the divine presence. And ability to recognize it when it comes behind the apparent multiplicity of the world, you begin to feel the one being guiding, nourishing, and that grace reaching out to you. So it is only when the life turns towards the divine that the soul can truly come forward. At that stage, the soul now comes forward freely and impose its power on the outer members. For itself a spark of the divine, to grow in flame towards the divine is its true life and its very reason of existence. So when the outer life progressively turned towards the divine, then the psychic being happily comes forward, because the very purpose of the psychic being is to grow towards the divine and grow in that light and become that fullness of our being. So that emergence is a progressive journey where we are initially looking at the instruments that are not listening, and over the years, slowly the life turns progressively towards searching for the divine, opening to the divine, and then the psychic being gladly comes forward and takes charge of the journey. At a certain stage in the yoga, when the mind is sufficiently quieted and no longer supports itself at every step on the sufficiency of its mental certitudes, when the vital has been steadied and subdued and no longer constantly insistent on its own rash will, demand, and desire, when the physical has been sufficiently altered not to bury altogether the inner flame under the mass of its outwardness, obscurity, and inertia, an inmost being, long hidden within and felt only in its rare influences, is able to come forward and illumine the rest and take up the lead of the sadhana. You see the construction of the line. He's going from mental, vital, physical. The mind made quiet, not relying upon its own certitudes, its own mental constructions. Mind has to become quiet so that it can listen to the gentle whispers of the psychic being. And the vital, instead of following its rash will that is quite arrogant and outward in its movement and demands and desires, recognizing that, stepping back from it, not to follow that rash, impulsive will of the vital and its desires. Then we have the physical layer with all its obscurities, which can submerge the flame. Inertia, incapacity, dullness of the physical consciousness, that progressively gets refined. Then the flame becomes visible. That is when the psychic being comes forward and illumine these layers and become the leader of our sadhana. Psychic being will begin to lead the transformational process. At a certain stage in the yoga, when the mind is sufficiently quieted and no longer supports itself at every step on the sufficiency of its mental certitudes, when the vital has been steadied and subdued, vital's very nature is to react and fluctuate. It has to become steady and subdued, and is no longer constantly insistent on its own rash will, demand, and desire. Again, the vital will has its nature to demand things, just like a child crying for its toy, insistent. That's the very nature of the vital and its will. So no longer constantly insistent on its own rash will, demand, and desire. When the physical has been sufficiently altered not to bury altogether the inner flame under the mass of its outwardness, obscurity, and inertia. Our physical consciousness, body consciousness, is usually always turned outward into the outer events and contacts with life that is surrounding physical world. Under the mass of its outwardness, obscurity, or inertia, an inmost being, long hidden within, and felt only in its rare influences, is able to come forward and illumine the rest and take up the lead of the sadhana. So it comes forward, it illumines the mind, illumines the vital, illumines the physical, purifies them. That is the influence of the psychic being as it emerges, and it becomes the leader of the sadhana. Its character is a one-pointed orientation towards the divine or the highest. One-pointed and yet plastic in action and movement. That's an amazing thing about psychic being. It's absolutely flexible, plastic in action and movement, yet it is always turned towards the divine presence, finding the way towards that, recognizing it, guiding, this is it, this is it, this is the direction we must go. It can recognize it. So the highest ideal or the divine is its orientation always, and yet it is able to adapt to the life situations. It can be very, very flexible in adapting to a situation because it never loses the sight of its goal, yet its very nature is harmony, and it finds a harmonious way of adapting to emerging situations, unlike other instruments. It does not create a rigidity of direction like the one-pointed intellect or a bigotry of the regnant idea. So there is certain rigidity that mind brings. When it is dominated by one idea, it becomes obsessed with an idea, nothing else. It becomes very inflexible when the mind is one-pointed. That is very natural for the mind to be rigid. And it's bigotry. That's very, very common with the intellect and its pride and its absolute focus. This is the right thing and this is the one thing to be done, and it is ready to be as hard as a rock when it is needed. That's what it does. Or impulse like the one-pointed vital force. So vital force, when it is one-pointed, general tendency of the vital force is to disperse from one thing to other, jumping from one after other. When it is one-pointed, there also it become impulsive in its nature. Its very nature of the vital is reactive and impulsive. It is at every moment and with a supple sureness that it points the way to the truth. So the psychic being, in every moment, there is a sureness, but it is a supple sureness, a very, very flexible, adapting sureness, that it points the way to the truth. It is always taking us towards the truth. Here is the capital T, not the mental truths, but the spiritual truth, because the psychic being can discern and point. Automatically distinguishes the right step from the false. Automatically distinguishes the right step from the false. It is a guidance that we receive step by step every moment. And any wrong step, it will be able to indicate, hey, this is not the right step. And in the right step, it will rejoice, yes, I'm moving in the right direction. It can give that certitude, automatically distinguishes the right step from the false, extricates the divine or Godward movement from the clinging mixture of the undivine. Our outer instrumental nature is a mixture, mental, vital, physical mixture. They cling to their undivine nature, mixed workings, habits, past formations, whereas the psychic being has a Godward turn towards the future, emergence, and recognition of the divine presence. It will be always extricating us, our movements, from this downward gravitation of the lower nature and turn towards an upward, Godward turn. So its character is a one-pointed orientation towards the divine or the highest. One-pointed and yet plastic in action and movement. It does not create a rigidity of direction like the one-pointed intellect or a bigotry of the regnant idea or impulse like the one-pointed vital force. It is at every moment and with a supple sureness that it points the way to the truth, automatically distinguishes the right step from the false, extricates the divine or Godward movement from the clinging mixture of the undivine. So this is the unique character. It's flexible, yet always showing the right direction. Its action is like a searchlight showing up all that has to be changed in the nature. Searchlight. Our normal human nature is an evolution happening in tamas, in ignorance, in inertia, in darkness. In that darkness, psychic being comes in like a searchlight, a light, beam of light exposing everything. It has in it a flame of will, insistent on perfection, on an alchemic transmutation of all the inner and outer existence. So, with that searchlight, it is bringing a flame of will insistent on perfection. It will show every minute movement that are of falsehood and distortion. It will show and insist. It has a flame will that will insist on perfecting it. So it's a perfection that unfolds moment to moment in every step, every movement of thought, speech, action. It is constantly, gently nudging towards perfection. There is a flame will and a flashlight that shows what is the tiny little error that needs to be corrected. Where is the path of light where you need to move forward? Its action is like a searchlight showing up all that has to be changed in the nature. It has in it a flame of will insistent on perfection, on an alchemic transmutation of all the inner and outer existence. It sees the divine essence everywhere, but rejects the mere mask and the disguising figure. So, what we see in our normal consciousness, mental, vital consciousness, is the outer appearances, the masks and figures. We don't see the essence. Whereas, when the psychic being comes forward and begins to lead us, behind the outer forms, you can see, perceive the divine essence. So, it sees the divine essence everywhere, but rejects the mere mask and the disguising figure. Anything that is just mere mask or a disguising figure, automatically it rejects and cuts through all the appearances and sees the divine essence. It insists on truth, on will and strength and mastery, on joy and love and beauty. So these are things the psychic being insists. Truth, capital T, truth. This is the most important central thing. It insists on truth. Then it insists on will and strength and mastery. So not only truth, it also looks at the dimension of mastery, strength, will. Then on joy and love and beauty. Joy, love, and beauty, all with capital letters. So this corresponds to Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat bringing truth, Chit bringing its consciousness force, Chit Shakti, will, strength, and mastery, and Ananda, bringing its joy, love, and beauty. Because the psychic being directly seeks that. So it insists on truth, on will and strength and mastery, on joy and love and beauty. But on a truth of abiding knowledge that surpasses the mere practical momentary truth of appearance. So that's the type of truth the psychic being rely on. An abiding knowledge, not the transient, practical, momentary truth of ignorance. Our life is immersed in ignorance, and there are practical, momentary truths. These are lesser truths. There is a greater abiding knowledge which psychic being rely on. And the truth of that knowledge, an eternal knowledge, a timeless knowledge, and its truth. That is what the psychic being insists, not any momentary, transient truth. On an inward joy and not on mere vital pleasure. Our vital seeks pleasure, whereas the psychic being looks at an inward joy, a self-existent inward joy, not anything that is outer. On an inward joy and not on mere vital pleasure, for it prefers rather a purifying suffering and sorrow to degrading satisfactions. Our vital being tendency is there to indulge in degrading satisfactions. That is where our senses get addicted. Our tongue get addicted to foods that are damaging us. All that is part of the vital that is moving towards or hooked by the degrading satisfactions. Psychic being, when it comes forward, it will step back from all this. Whether it is indulging in media consumption that is degrading, or gossiping, or any other forms of indulgence that degrades and degenerates, psychic being will not indulge, it will not go into it. It will step back. It would rather prefer to sit quietly, and also it will feel sad because outer nature is not listening to it, is losing or damaging itself by indulging in degrading pleasures. Whereas psychic being would rather prefer a purifying and suffering sorrow. It would, this sorrow and suffering that purifies. And this is not a sorrow and suffering of the vital being, which is dramatic, theatrical, intense. Whereas the psychic being's sorrow and suffering is very quiet, silent, inner. On the love winged upward and not tied to the stake of egoistic craving or with its feet sunk in the mire. So the type of love that psychic being seeks is the love that is winged upward. It lifts you upward towards spiritual realization, not the human love tied to the stake of egoistic craving and with its feet sunk into the mire. Our human love has its attachments, its demands, its drama, and its violence, and it is sunk in the mire of desire, demands, all kinds of possessions and fear, and it has a tendency to get degenerate into these dark, sunken forms. But psychic being looks at the pure love, unconditional love that ascends towards higher and higher divine realizations. On love winged upward and not tied to the stake of egoistic craving or with its feet sunk in the mire. On beauty restored to its priesthood of interpretation of the eternal. So here again, beauty is at the service of interpreting the eternal, so that beauty gets restored to its priesthood. It acts as a mediator, taking us towards the divine, eternal. on strength and will and mastery as instruments, not of the ego but of the spirit. So when the psychic being seeks strength and will and mastery, it is sought as instruments, not of the ego but of the spirit, so that serving the spirit become possible with the strength and mastery, not for its sake of the ego. Let me read this long line. It insists on truth. It is psychic being. It insists on truth, on will and strength and mastery, on joy and love and beauty, but on a truth of abiding knowledge that surpasses the mere practical momentary truth of the ignorance, on an inward joy and not on mere vital pleasure. For it prefers rather a purifying suffering and sorrow to degrading satisfactions, on love winged upward and not tied to the stake of egoistic craving, or with its feet sunk in the mire, on beauty restored to its priesthood of interpretation of the eternal, on strength and will and mastery as instruments not of the ego but of the spirit. Its will is for the divinization of life, the expression through it of a higher truth, its dedication to the divine and the eternal. This is the fundamental nature of the psychic being. Its will is for the divinization of life. It wants to divinize. It's the very purpose of the existence of the psychic being is to divinize life, divinize this world. And the expression through it of a higher truth. It wants to express the higher truth of the divine nature. It's a dedication to the divine and the eternal. The psychic being is dedicated to the divine and the eternal. That's the very nature of the psychic being. But the most intimate character of the psychic is its pressure towards the divine through a sacred love, joy, and oneness. So it has the dimension of knowledge, it has the dimension of power, but its character, most intimate character of the psychic being is its pressure towards the divine through a sacred love, joy, and oneness. Sacred love, joy, and oneness. This is its most intimate character, even when it is capable of other aspects of knowledge and will. Sacred love, joy, and oneness is its most intimate character. And when the growth of the psychic being happens within us, we do feel something very sacred and pure growing within us, and a steady, quiet joy growing in us, and a growing sense of oneness with life that is all around. It is a divine love that it seeks most. It is the love of the divine that is its spur, its goal, its star of truth, shining over the luminous cave of the nascent or the still obscure cradle of the newborn Godhead within us. Newborn Godhead within us. Obscure cradle. Our life, as Aurobindo repeats again and again, is emerging in evolutionary process from the inconscient and bound by ignorance. That is the cradle. It's an obscure cradle in which this tiny little flame is lit. That is the little newborn Godhead within us. And it is lit in this cave of the heart. And that is where it becomes a luminous cave. And there is the North Star truth of this little Godhead. It is the divine love. That is what it seeks. That little flame born within us, it seeks the divine love, which is its North Star. It is the divine love that it seeks the most. It seeks most. It is the love of the divine, love of the divine. That is its its goal, its star of truth, shining over the luminous cave of the nascent, or the still obscure cradle of the newborn Godhead within us. Our depth, something in our depth is thirsting for love. But the love we experience in this human world is always limited, very narrow, and mixed with all the attachments, fears, anxieties, desires, all types of negativity that walks into it. It's very narrow, limited. Whereas there is this thirst in us for a perfect love and its delight and its infinity. There is something in us. That is the psychic being yearning for the divine love, dissatisfied with the coarse stuff that we experience in our human interactions. It is a divine love that it seeks most. It is the love of the divine that is its spur, its goal, its star of truth, shining over the luminous cave of the nascent, or the still obscure cradle of the newborn Godhead within us. In the first long stage of its growth and immature existence, in the initial stage of its birth and growth, its existence is very immature. It's like a tiny little baby growing up inside, a pure noble, the Kumara, a little golden child within, born. It has leaned on earthly love and affection, tenderness, goodwill, compassion, benevolence, on all beauty and gentleness and fineness and light and strength and courage, on all that can help to refine and purify the grossness and commonness of human nature. Our human nature has grossness, certain crudeness. How to refine it? That refinement, to do that, it lean on earthly love, affection, tenderness, goodwill, compassion, benevolence, on all beauty and gentleness and fineness, and light and strength and courage, on all that can help to refine and purify the grossness and commonness of human nature. So the very purpose of the psychic being is to bring that higher consciousness into this life and refine the crudeness of our existence. But our outer nature is not receptive to it. Therefore, it has to rely on all the earthly love and affection, tenderness, goodwill, compassion, benevolence, all that it makes use of, on all beauty and gentleness and fineness and light and strength and courage, on all that can help to refine and purify the grossness and commonness of human nature. But it knows how mixed are these human movements at their best, and at their worst, how fallen and stamped with the mark of ego and self-deceptive sentimental falsehood, and the lower self-profiting by the imitation of the soul movement. Our outer nature, particularly our human heart, has a tendency to imitate, even human mind imitates the soul movement and pretends to be a universal love, a sacred love. But it is just trying to profit by claiming to be divine love. That's not the nature of our outer nature. It is egocentric, it is self-centered, it is craving for itself, demanding for itself. It is, even when it is pretending to be a divine love. When it goes around and serves the world in the name of charity, in the name of humanitarian considerations, it is imitating. It's a pale imitation. So the psychic being It knows how mixed are these human movements at their best. Psychic being, once it emerges, it knows, it sees through the game, and it can see how mixed these things are. And at their worst, how fallen and stamped with the mark of ego. Stamped with the mark of ego, fallen. So when someone is giving charity, they want to put their name over there. I, me, and myself, how great I am. Put my name over there. When I support, when I help somebody, put my name over there. Give me credit. The ego finds its way. And self-deceptive, sentimental falsehood, and lower self-profiting by the imitation of the soul, of a soul movement. Let's read this line once again, because this is very, very common. In the first long stage of its growth and immature existence, it has leaned on earthly love and affection, tenderness, goodwill, compassion, benevolence, on all beauty and gentleness and fineness and light and strength and courage, on all that can help to refine and purify the grossness and commonness of human nature. But it knows how mixed are these human movements at their best, and at their worst, how fallen and stamped with the mark of ego and self-deceptive sentimental falsehood, and the lower self-profiting by the imitation of a soul movement. At once emerging, it is ready and eager to break all the old ties and imperfect emotional activities and replace them by a greater spiritual truth of love and oneness. So, as the psychic being emerges from behind the veil, it is eager and it is ready to break all the old ties. Old ties, imperfect love and imperfect activities of emotional being. So, old ties and imperfect emotional activities, and replace them by a greater spiritual truth of love and oneness. There is this truth, greater spiritual truth of love and oneness, that psychic being is able to bring into our experiential understanding. It accepts only the ties that are helpful. The psychic being automatically discards all the ties, relationships that are not helpful. It accepts only the ties that are helpful. The heart's and mind's reverence for the Guru, the union of the God seekers, a spiritual compassion for its ignorant human and animal world and its peoples, the joy and happiness and satisfaction of beauty that comes from the perception of the divine everywhere. That's the very nature of the psychic being. It perceives the divine everywhere, and there is a joy and satisfaction, a happiness that comes from seeing that beauty, that comes from the perception of the divine everywhere. It's not beauty for the sake of beauty. It is beauty for the sake of the divine. You see the divine behind things. A spiritual compassion for this ignorant human and animal world and its people. So here, there comes the true compassion, a spiritual compassion, not a sentimental, emotional compassion or an intellectual, ethical compassion. Here it is a spiritual compassion. The union of the God seekers. That's another. All those who seek the divine, there is a profound natural union with that. Hearts and minds reverence for the Guru, the one who is embodiment of that teaching, that light, who is dispeller of the darkness. There's a natural reverence, heart and mind's reverence for the Guru. So all this is spontaneous for the psychic being. And that's where the devotion to the Guru, devotion to the divine, all that spontaneously comes when the psychic being emerges. So it accepts only the ties that are helpful, the heart's and mind's reverence for the Guru, the union of the God seekers, a spiritual compassion for this ignorant human animal world and its people, joy and happiness and satisfaction of beauty that comes from the perception of the divine everywhere. It plunges the nature inward towards its meeting with the immanent divine. All other instruments are turned outward and entangled with the life that is unfolding outside. The psychic being, on the other hand, turns inward and towards its meeting with the immanent divine. It knows there is immanent divine. Divine is seated deep within, and the psychic being is turned towards finding and uniting with the immanent divine within oneself. It plunges the nature inward towards its meeting with the immanent divine. Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam. The divine is the inhabitant of this entire manifest world. It is seated everywhere in everything. So within the human nature, it is the psychic being that helps to go inward to discover the immanent divinity, because it knows it has come from that. It is a very portion of that. In the heart's secret center, and while that call is there, no reproach of egoism, no mere outward summons of altruism or duty or philanthropy or service will deceive or divert it from its sacred longing and its obedience to the attraction of the divinity within it. So the psychic being is very clear in terms of priority. So no summons of altruism. So you will come across always people demanding altruistic behavior and service from you. And the psychic being in you knows, my first priority is discovering the divinity seated within me. Similarly, the duty or philanthropy or service, none of this will deceive the psychic being. It knows the sacred longing and its obedience to the attraction of the divinity within it. There is a divinity deep within it, and it must discover that. It is its top priority, and everything else can wait. This has to come as the top priority. So it plunges the nature inward towards its meeting with the immanent divine in the heart's secret center. And while that call is there, no reproach of egoism, our outer personality and ego and its calls, no reproach of egoism, no mere outward summons of altruism or duty or philanthropy or service will deceive or divert it from its sacred longing and its obedience to the attraction of the divinity within it. It lifts the being towards a transcendent ecstasy. Not only that it goes inward and discovers the immanent divine, it lifts the being towards a transcendent ecstasy, an ecstasy that transcends this world, this time-space bound world. It's a transcendent ecstasy and is ready to shed all the downward pull of the world from its wings in its uprising to reach the one highest. So it is very ready and glad to shed all the downward pull of the world from its wings. Otherwise, its wings get tied down by the lower nature and its demands. So it is ready to shed everything in its uprising to reach the one highest. But it calls down also the transcendent love and beatitude to deliver and transform this world of hatred and strife and division and darkness and jarring ignorance. So it not only rises upward into the transcendent ecstasy, but also it wants to bring down that love and beatitude to deliver and transform this world of hatred and strife and division and darkness and jarring ignorance. Our world is steeped in ignorance, full of conflicts, full of darkness, division, strife, hatred. That is the very nature of our human world. Into this world, the psychic being brings love and beatitude from the transcendent ecstasy it reaches. That is its very function. It brings that down into this world. It opens to a universal divine love, a vast compassion, an intense and immense will for the good of all, for the embrace of the world mother, enveloping or gathering to her children, the divine passion that has plunged into the night for the redemption of the world from the universal inconscience. So, this is where the true embracing of the world and all the activities of the world, all the peoples of the world, everything comes from the divine love and a vast compassion. This is a pure spiritual compassion, not an imitation of the ethical mind, not an imitation of the refined heart, but a true divine love coming from the deeper depth and higher heights. So it opens to a universal divine love, a vaster compassion, an intense and immense will for the good of all. So from there, it gains this immense will for the good of all, the welfare of the world. And there is an immense will in the psychic being for the good of all, for the embrace of the world mother, the divine mother, the divine Shakti, whose embrace, and she embraces the world, enveloping and gathering to her children. So this is the divine Shakti birthing herself in us, emerging in us, through us, embracing the world, gathering her children. So you recognize her action that is happening through instruments, her vibhutis, who embrace the world through the divine love and compassion, embracing, gathering gathering to her children, the divine passion that has plunged into the night. She is willing to plunge into the night for the redemption of the world from the universal inconscience. And we can see in the works of the mother of Pondicherry, where she plunges deep into the inconscience, even to transform, to bring the divine love and its action into the very cells of the human body that is bound by the inconscience and ignorance, and to transform the very physical consciousness of human nature. And the kind of pain that she took upon herself, the sacrifice that she has done in order to bring that divine love into the deepest, darkest corners of our material existence, into the very cellular automation that is happening, into that, bringing in the divine love. It opens to a universal divine love, a vast compassion, an intense, immense will for the good of all, for the embrace of the world mother, enveloping or gathering to her children, the divine passion that is plunged into the night for the redemption of the world from the universal inconscience. It is not attached or misled by mental imitations or any vital misuse of these great, deep-seated truth of our existence. So our outer emotional being has a tendency to get attached to anything that it loves, whereas this divine love from where the psychic being is coming and radiating and embracing the world, it is not attracted or misled by the mental limitations or any vital misuse of these great deep-seated truths of existence. So it never gets misled or attracted by the mental limitations or vital misuse of these great deep-seated truths of existence. It exposes them with its detecting search ray and calls down the entire truth of divine love. So there is a tendency in the mental imitations and vital misuse to distort. Even when the higher divine love and consciousness and light comes in, they have a tendency to distort. And the psychic being will not be misled by that. It will expose with a searchlight precision where the distortion is happening. And it calls down the entire truth of divine love to heal these malformations, to deliver mental, vital, physical love from their insufficiencies or their perversions and reveal to them their true abounding share of the intimacy and the oneness, the ascending ecstasy and the descending rapture. Ascending and descending. In our earlier episodes, earlier chapters, Aurobindo has repeatedly spoken about an ascending current and a descending current. So psychic being will put us in touch with that ascending ecstasy, and there is a descending ecstasy, an ascending ecstasy and a descending rapture. When you receive the divine love and delight, there is a rapture that happens. And that is what transforms the entire human mold in its mental, vital, physical layers. So if our psychic being puts us in touch with, it lifts us upward. It is the ascending current, upward triangle, the ascending current, and there is a descending triangle, which descending rapture of the divine consciousness pouring down from above. It will not get deceived by the deformations in the mental, vital, and physical nature. It will show where it is getting distorted and it will correct it, refine it, so that our entire instrumental nature become expressive of the divine consciousness. It is not attracted or misled by mental imitations or any vital misuse of these great deep-seated truths of existence. It exposes them with its detecting search ray and calls down the entire truth of divine love to heal these malformations, to deliver mental, vital, physical love from their insufficiencies or their perversions and reveal to them their true abounding share of the intimacy and oneness, the ascending ecstasy and the descending rapture. It will infuse our three instrumental layers with that consciousness and deliver these parts of our being to their true possibility and potential. All true truth of love and of the works of love, the psychic being accepts in their place. So now we are coming to the works of love, of which the psychic being is the prime mover. All true truth of love and of the works of love, the psychic being accepts in their place. But its flame mounts always upward, and it is eager to push the ascent from lesser to higher degrees of truth, since it knows that only by the ascent to a highest truth and the descent of that highest truth can love be delivered from the cross and placed upon the throne. Here he is bringing the imagery from Christianity Christ is someone who realized the divine love within himself. And he was crucified. He was not placed on the throne of the world. He was crucified. The divine love in coming avatars of love of the new world, they will not be crucified. They will be in the thrones of the world, recognizing the divine love and the mastery of the divine love of this world is absolutely essential, and the psychic being knows that. And any works of love that brings that great truth into the world, psychic being naturally, spontaneously open to it. The cross is the sign of the divine descent, barred and marred by the transversal line of a cosmic deformation, which turns it into a stake of suffering and misfortune. So on one hand, there is this vertical descent of the divine love, divine consciousness, divine Satchidananda into this material world. That's the descending movement. Then there is a transverse movement of our limited material life here that creates distortions. So the cross is the sign of the divine descent, barred and marred by the transversal line of the cosmic deformation, which turns it into a stake of suffering and misfortune. So this divine love and delight that plunges into this inconscient, it gets marred and barred and deformed, and that is where it turns the whole thing into suffering and misfortune. It's a distortion that happens in the descending movement. All the truth of love and of the works of love, the psychic being accepts in their place. But its flame mounts always upward in its eager, and it is eager to push the ascent from lesser to higher degrees of truth. Psychic being knows it has to reach certain absolute truth. It knows that only by the ascent to a highest truth and the descent of that highest truth can love be delivered from the cross and placed upon the throne. For the cross is the sign of the divine descent, barred and marred by the transversal line of a cosmic deformation, which turns it into a stake of suffering and misfortune. It is not necessary. In fact, the yogic transformation doesn't require suffering at all. When you discover the psychic being and the path of the psychic being, which is referred to as a sunlit path, because the sunlit path is where, just like a sunflower is always turning towards the sun, the psychic being is always showing us where the divine is, and unerring discernment. With that, suffering can be eliminated, minimized. There is progress from joy to greater joy, perfection to greater perfection. And we can reduce and eliminate suffering in the process of our evolutionary transformation. Suffering is not required at all. And the key to that is the discovery of the psychic being. Only by the ascent to the original truth can the deformation be healed. And all the works of love, as too all the works of knowledge and of life, be restored to a divine significance and become part of an integral spiritual existence. So when this ascension to the highest truth happens, which psychic being naturally leads us, then this deformation can be healed And all the works of love, S2, all works of knowledge and of life, be restored to a divine significance. So all the labor of love in the world, whatever form it takes, everything gets restored and the divine significance gets revealed when this ascension to the highest truth is accomplished and that truth is brought down. Then every activity is embraced as a labor of love and divine significance is brought out and become part of the integral spiritual existence. Integral spiritual existence where the manifest world and the highest heights are united. And you are here, but abiding in that highest consciousness, but engaged in this profound divine labor of love in the world, expressing that divine love and revealing the significance of the divine in all these works of love. So with that, we have come to the end of this chapter. So Sri Aurobindo has covered knowledge and love, sacrifice of knowledge, sacrifice of love, both ascending towards the highest truth, and only when that is brought in, everything in this world can be embraced and brought out the significance of the divine truth and love in all that. And in this journey of love, psychic being is the key. And we are privileged to get to know this knowledge in its detailed explanation given by Sri Aurobindo. Let's be grateful to his teachings. Thank you for being with me in this journey. It's my joy to share this with you. And please do subscribe to this channel and also click the like button. That will help the YouTube algorithms to promote this channel, this video. Thank you. See you next week.